Been the type to mind my own business. Raised that way, you know? Don't get involved. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try to stay out of it, life has a way of pulling you in. This is the story of how I got pulled into something I never saw coming. It all started about 12 years ago, when I moved into the house on Elm Street. I had just gone through a messy divorce, and I was looking for a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild. The house was small, with a faded yellow paint job and ivy creeping up one side. It wasn't much, but it was mine. At first, everything was peaceful. I spent my days unpacking, trying to create a sense of normalcy. It wasn't until a few months in that I noticed something strange. You know that feeling you get when you're not alone, like someone's watching you from across the room, even though you're the only one there? I kept getting that feeling. It wasn't all the time, but often enough that it made me uneasy. I thought it was just the stress of the divorce, the weight of being alone. But then came the knocking. One evening, while I was in the kitchen making dinner, I heard it, a soft knock on the front door. I froze. It was odd because I hadn't heard anyone approach. I didn't get visitors, especially not at that hour. I peered through the peephole, but no one was there. At first, I thought it was just the wind. I convinced myself I was imagining things and went back to cooking, but it didn't stop there. The next night, it happened again. Soft, rhythmic knocks. Same time, same place. I checked the door, the porch, but still nothing. No one was there. Now, I've always been a practical woman, so I dismissed it. Maybe it was kids playing pranks or some random passerby. But deep down, I started feeling that pull. Something was wrong. And it only got worse when I started hearing whispers. It started softly at first, just a murmur from the back of the house. I thought maybe it was the neighbors, but no. The sounds were coming from within my own walls. I tried to rationalize it. Pipes, settling foundation, you know the drill. But one night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the whispers again, clearer now. And they were saying my name. Joan. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't asleep yet, but I was frozen in place. My name, spoken in a voice that wasn't my own. I called out, but no one answered. I grabbed the phone, ready to dial the police, but something stopped me. I wish I had called, because what happened next changed everything. The following day, I decided to do some research. I spent hours digging through old records at the local library. Elm Street wasn't a popular place for gossip, but when I finally found the file on my house, my blood ran cold. The previous owners, a couple named Tom and Mary Whitaker, had lived there for over 20 years. The file described a family, a happy, normal family. But the last entry was the one that caught my attention. It was from a police report dated 2 years before I moved in. The Whitakers had been reported missing. Neighbors said they hadn't been seen for weeks, and there was no sign of foul play, no evidence to suggest anything unusual. The police had closed the case, assuming they'd left town for some reason. But I knew in my gut, something didn't add up. I needed to know more, so I went to the local library's archive to dig into old newspapers. I pulled up articles from around the time the Whitakers disappeared. Nothing, not a single word about their whereabouts. But one article did catch my eye. An unrelated story about a string of disappearances in the area, all centered around Elm Street. It had been written off as coincidence by the authorities. But now that I had a little more information, it didn't feel like one. I became obsessed. I started visiting the house at odd hours, looking for any clue, anything to explain the whispers. And then I found it. In the basement, hidden behind a false wall, I found old photographs. Some were of the Whitakers, smiling and happy, but others were black and white photos, some blurred, others sharp, each one showing a person standing by the front door of my house. The same door where I had heard the knocks. The same door where I had felt that terrible sense of being watched. There were dozens of these photos, spanning decades. Some of the people in the photos were still around. Some had disappeared over the years. But one name stood out. A woman named Emma Lawson. She had lived on Elm Street in the 1950s, and she had vanished without a trace. I found her name in the same newspaper archives I had already searched. But now, with this new context, it made my skin crawl. The more I researched, the more I learned about the history of the house. It wasn't just the Whitakers. There had been others too. People who lived on this street, on this very block, and then just disappeared, and the house was always involved. I went back to the house that night. I had to know. The whispers were louder now, almost urgent. I went into the basement, the place where I found the photos. The air was thick, cold. As I stood there, staring at the wall, I heard the knock again, this time from inside the house. The door to the basement creaked open, and standing there in the doorway was the figure of a man. Tall, thin, his face obscured by shadows. But his eyes, those eyes were the same as in the photographs. It was Tom Whitaker. I don't know how to explain it, but I know what I saw. The ghost of Tom Whitaker had come back to warn me, or maybe he wanted me to join them, the others who had disappeared. I moved out the next day. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I don't know if Tom Whitaker was ever really dead, or if the house itself was somehow feeding off the fear, the pain of the people who had lived there, but I don't care to find out. I've never been back, so if you're ever looking for a place to call home, stay far away from Elm Street. You might find yourself stuck there, like all the others. I know I'll never forget it, and maybe, just maybe, I hope you don't either.